Have you ever wondered what psychedelics really do to the brain, or why ancient plant medicines are starting to become the future of healing? In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Maya Shetreat, who is an integrative pediatric neurologist, herbalist, and an author, and she explains how psychedelics can rewire the brain, open new pathways to healing, and reconnect us with something deeper than ourselves. We talk about why true healing isn't always just physical, but also energetic, and how these plants, psychedelics, can be powerful allies on that journey. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, or share if this episode resonates with you. It's time for confession. Maya, welcome to the show. I'd like to first ask with how would you describe the work that you used to do and then what you potentially now do today?
Well, that's a great question because, I think of myself as a person who follows the cosmic breadcrumbs, kind of, or I call them drops from the quantum, right, where we get guided. And I'm sort of, I would say, as many of us, I think, are in a little bit of a molecular reorganization right now. I think we're in a big change time. And that doesn't really date this because we've been in a big change time for, I think, a number of years now. Um, but to ask, where did I come from and who I am now? I mean, there's so many ways I could answer that, but I think, I went to medical school with the idea I was going to do what turned out to be integrative medicine. I think, I was interested in healing in the mind and psychoneuroimmunology, which they said on this TV special I saw that it's a field in medicine. And then I applied to medical school. I wrote about that. I did medical school. I did residency. I did fellowship. And then I emerged and there was no such field of psychoneuroimmunology that was really a field. I mean, yes, people did do some research in that, but I couldn't even find those people. And so I ended up kind of having to build my work, build that field, that practice, I would say, for myself. And it came through the illness of my son, actually, more than one time. I think of him as my muse, which is not a very enviable role, it turns out. But thankfully, he's now a strapping 19-year-old, college student. Um, but I definitely was never really a traditional or conventional thinker. But I did try to inhabit that in order to come through medical training. And the rest of my life after that has just been a series of, I don't know exactly what I'd call it, but kind of, I'd say sort of death experiences that are then followed by rebirth into what is more true and authentic in my purpose of what I have to offer as a human being that wants to be of service in the world. So I'm still a doctor. I'm still a neurologist. I'm still an herbalist. Along the way, I've definitely taken some more identities. I've shed identities. I shed my identity of being a wife as it happened, because not because that was a choice. Again, all of these things are kind of what unfolds, and then you sometimes can see the intelligence of it. But then I studied ancient astrology. I studied with indigenous teachers. I became a ceremonialist. Um, and and now I would really say that my work is about cultivating a relationship with the divine that's within us and around us. And that's not really religious. It's just, I think, a state of being and something that we seem to have forgotten. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a name for what I do exactly, but I think the most important thing, no matter where we are in our evolution, is to know our mission.
You are a neurologist, but you also describe yourself as a mystic and basically that background that you've just given us. You mentioned your son, which I'm going to touch on as well, but was there a pivotal moment when they're very not separate, but you have science and medicine, neurologist, as well as mysticism, as you're saying, astrology. Was it your son that was the catalyst that sort of merged the two worlds together? Or was it something that you always, when you were a young child, were very drawn to?
I didn't think of myself as having a scientific side as a child, really. I would say I was much more, I was a big reader. I was very, uh, I, I was a very fast reader, and I was an only child, so I read a lot. Um, and and my home when I was growing up was difficult. Um, my parents were both, I think, had their own complex PTSD and sort of were emotionally immature and dysregulated and struggled quite a bit. So it was a very explosive environment. And so I, as an only child, had my escape in nature and in books. And I didn't think of myself as being good at science or good at math, particularly. Uh, and my gift always seemed to be with words, and whether it was reading or writing, um, and music, right, those kinds of fields. So I discovered in high school, I guess, that I could do science, and um and then when I went to college, I decided to be an English major. um but then I thought, I kind of gave myself this challenge. I didn't know what I was going to do after college. And I actually thought I might become a singer or a journalist. And then um, I met my husband, the person who became my husband for a period of time. And he was going to med school, and he kind of thought like I'd be really good at med school. So he was sort of giving me this like, and I thought, well, I am kind of interested in this psychoneuro. I mean, I kind of went back and remembered and thought, well, um, I'm going to give myself this challenge. I'm going to take organic chemistry. And if I do well in it, that'll be a sign that I should go to med school. And I took it, and I very shockingly actually fell in love with it. And I used to spend hours and hours. It was like puzzle solving, which I'm a little Scorpio sun. It was like everything I loved. And I used to spend hours and just look up, and it would have been like 4 or 5 hours that I would have just been working on organic chemistry problems. Like, it's ridiculous, really, even thinking back to that. But ended up getting an A+ in organic chemistry. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to med school.
I want to go back to your son then. So your son had a seizure, and you mentioned that you instinctively knew that it was his energy body that needed healing, not just the physical body. What exactly did you mean by that for the listeners that don't understand? And did it shift your perspective on illness?
Well, it did. We had had a big mold remediation, and he had been really sick before that. So we'd moved out of our apartment um, for 5 months while they did a whole um, mold remediation, renovation down to the studs of where the mold had been. And there was more than one spot. We got rid of all of the upholstered furniture, literally got rid of it, all the stuffed animals, all of the clothes were professionally cleaned. Like, people came in with toothbrushes at the end and cleaned every little bit. Like, it was tested. There was no mold. We moved back in 2 weeks later. My son, who had been doing great, had this seizure. There was no mold. Everything was tested. Everything had been gotten rid of. I mean, we had wood. That was it. We were literally sitting on a floor when we first moved back in. So I knew it wasn't that physical trigger in the same way. And the irony was, I was the only integrative pediatric neurologist really in the world kind of doing the work at that time that I was doing. I mean, this was well over a decade ago. There weren't very many practicing integrative pediatric neurologists at that time. Um, and so I was seeing people from all over the world. Most people would have sent him to see me. And I knew I did not have the tools to help him. And I knew that I had done so many things already for his physical body: diet, botanical, detoxification, time in nature. I mean, you name it. I had done all these things. And so I knew and I just knew it in my body. And sometimes, I think a lot of times we're very detached from that kind of knowing, but there are times, usually most of us could say at least once, at least twice, right, in our lives, like, where we just know something like through our body. And in that moment, it really was like a message, kind of a message from the beyond or the universe, kind of saying, this is your charge that you now have to unfold and unpack and find what your son needs. But really, for me, everything I've ever had to go through has always become a service I've offered, right? Uh, like a wisdom I've had to uncover in order to be able to offer that to other people. It's never just been, oh, this is to help my son. But each time, right, you kind of forget that when you're in the turmoil of the moment. You're not like, oh, this is going to be helpful to the other people in the world. You're like, oh my God, just how am I going to save him, or how am I going to save myself? Or, right. So, but I just understood that I had done all the physical things. And of course, there could have been more one or the other thing, but I knew. And that took me to my spiritual teacher, which at the time, which I didn't know was a spiritual teacher. I wasn't like, oh, let me find a spiritual teacher. I was just like, I need someone to help me. And it was very mythic. I went, I asked for help. They turned me away. I'm too busy. I can't help you. I went back, right? It's like they turned me away 3 times. Like it was very, I don't know, like biblical almost. And and then I ended up working with that person for a period of time. I had no idea what she even did. Someone just gave me her name, said, maybe this person can help you. I mean, it unfolded in a very mystical way. Um, and then I ended up going to Ecuador. Also, very strange circumstances. I found out, you know, I knew that this person I'd heard at a conference, a fourth generation shaman who taught about master plants and indigenous healing. I thought, oh, I want to learn with her. She said, yes, just look at my website. So it was like, I keep looking on her website, looking. There's no website. It wasn't really a website at all. It was just like a strange page that had nothing on it. And then I sort of got distracted and for a little while stopped looking. And then I don't know, maybe a month or two later, I checked it one last time and the trip was the next week. I just so happened my assistant had just left from my work. I didn't have patients scheduled. I happened to have like money that I could go. Like it was all these things kind of came together um and I went on that trip and little did I know it was not a time when people were going to the jungle to do psychedelics and there was like all this psychedelic tourism. It was not like that at all. I was a mom of young kids and a integrative pediatric and adult neurologist that wanted to learn about indigenous healing to help my son. And nobody mentioned the word psychedelics. Nobody mentioned anything about ceremony that we were going to do, anything like that. And I probably wouldn't have gone. Honestly, if I knew that, I would not have gone. And obviously, the universe in some way understood that because I showed up. I didn't know anyone on the trip at all. I didn't know Spanish. I've never traveled by myself to like a random country in South America to go to the jungle, and I mean, I was worried about like malaria. I just like, and then I landed there and, you know, that was the beginning of, I guess, the rest of my life, I would say.
From a neurological perspective, what happens in the brain during a psychedelic experience that makes it so powerful for healing depression, somatic illness, chronic illness?
Well, there's a lot of different ways I could answer that, but I think I'll start with kind of the neurophysiologic answer and the structural neurology answer, which is, we have these constellation of areas of the brain that all work together. And it's called the default mode network. And the default mode network is basically one of its major jobs is to suppress traumas, deep emotions, old memories, um, so that we can function, right? And attend to what's in the world around us, which is so important for survival and success. And so, what psychedelics do is they actually turn that off, that whole system. They take it offline for a period of time. And so all of that suppressing of old memories and emotions, et cetera, kind of become available to us in a way that allows us to transform them, right? To have a conversation with them, because so much of what we do is suppressed, is compartmentalized. And oftentimes we have to do that to survive, right? And to become a successful person. I mean, that system is probably very overdeveloped in a lot of people. And the more kind of capital T trauma, or even like what I would call wounding, right? It doesn't all have to be something that would, make it onto like the front page of the newspaper, but it's feeling, like differently treated than your sibling, or, bullied, or right, these things that don't like show up on this list of what we call adverse childhood events, but they wound us. And those, all of those things we we put aside, or we would just, I mean, we would never be able to like come up for air, if we really entertain those things all the time. And what happens is that the default mode network is responsible also for something called predictive coding. And predictive coding is when we walk into any new situation, we think we see all the aspects of that situation, right? Walk into a party, you're like, oh, there's my friend so and so. These people are drinking cocktails over there. Oh, look at the snacks. I like the music, right? You're just taking everything in. But usually what's actually happening is you just see a few details, and your brain fills in the rest based on past experience. And so that's helpful again for survival, right? Again, that's very effective, because you don't want to have to be like, oh my God, it's a person with a knife, and look, that knife is shiny, and look, that, right? You're not going to sit and think, you have to turn around and run. But the problem is, if you once ever walked into a room and there was danger, and then every time you walk into a room again where there's a detail that might kind of remind you of that, then your brain might fill in a lot of details that make you think you're in danger when you're really not in danger, right? And that could be like you're having a difficult conversation with a spouse, or you have to like talk to your boss, or you're going to a party, right? Or a new social situation. And you're constantly translating it to, this is danger, this is danger, this is danger. So, right, this is, I think, a lot of what's coming up in the anxious and avoidant attachment craze that, is all I get served on Instagram these days. But it's kind of really an interesting window into how predictive coding works, right? So when we turn off the default mode network, we also have this opportunity to see things, I don't want to say exactly as they really are, but we see things without the lens of the reality that we create, which is just created by us. It's not, there's no objective reality. And that's like so important, I think, for all of us to recognize when we're sitting and saying, well, I won't talk to this person because they voted that way, or that's an avoidant, or that's an anxious, or that's a, right, where we're all like trying to demonize everyone. And the truth is, it's really all about our own lens. To a great degree, it's like our own lens is creating a lot of this reality for us. So um we're complicit with everybody else's bad behavior, because we're all kind of operating with these lenses. And the beautiful thing is, psychedelics can help us see beyond that lens. And that gives us a completely new perspective, um, by way of also facilitating neuroplasticity, so that we now have the ability to rewire and make new connections, um, and hopefully find safety that we couldn't find. Safety is also not really exactly real, but it's something that's felt. It's a felt sense. And if you don't have a felt sense of safety, then life is going to become very difficult. And if you do have a felt sense of safety, no matter what the circumstances, life is going to feel less difficult. So this is where the psychedelic, or the master plant itself, is not going to do all that work, right? Some of the work is you're opening this container to shift and change and have this neuroplasticity and find safety in these old memories and traumas and emotions, and see beyond what you saw. And you need to have a container. And this is sort of my important, I don't want to say disclaimer, but warning is, it's not just, oh, let me go do this psychedelic, you know, in my basement, or like get it off the dark web, or like run off to Costa Rica, or whatever it may be. There's really kind of a sacred container that involves safety. It's really important. It's not just a ceremony. It's not just clinical. It's not just um, having some cool music and beautiful, right? Beautiful people. And it's about being able to reframe experiences such that we can operate differently going forward. And if we have a experience that feels like danger, we will be re-traumatized. And that's not, and I've met many people for whom that's happened, um, and they feel so ashamed that they didn't get that healing experience. But for them, either it wasn't a good fit, what they were doing, how they were doing it, the container they were in, they weren't n- regulated in their nervous system, whatever it may be. That is a critical part. And every study that's been done that looks very impressive always has professional support before, during, and after.
So I'm someone who's personally done a lot of ceremonies with Amazon plants, as well as, isolated plant dietas, master plant dietas that went for 10 days, where you can witness profound healing. But I witnessed psychosis, like severe psychosis in other individuals where they were to the point of destabilization, where their life never returned to normal. So it was this dichotomy of like, you can see the beauty, but the pain. So how do people navigate the psychedelic terrain safely and responsibly? You've mentioned like safety being a big one, having a regulated nervous system. So how does someone know whether or not they're the right candidate to be participating in some of these types of ceremonies? And you mentioned also like having like professional support. So would you say that some of these ceremonies that, people go to Peru and there might be the shaman in Peru and it's just this container of maybe like 20 people and the shaman, that's not always the best or safest space for some people?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are people who need one-on-one holding. I think there are people who can do a bigger group. I think some groups are way too big, and this has become a money-making thing. And that is just unfortunately the case because of how things have unfolded and the demand I mean, there's a lot I could say about that, but, um, I mean, this is why I train people, right? But I think the key for me is, um, making sure that you feel right. You're not doing it because you think you should. You're not doing it because um, you heard it's really good. You're not doing it because you want to see God, right? Necessarily, right? But going because you feel a call, and it is a very clear, visceral call. And then what I recommend doing is l- cultivating a relationship with the plant. I recommend they read about the plants, they look at picture of the plants, they know really, right? This isn't just about having a psychedelic experience, but it's a relationship that you're building with a master teacher. These are ancient teachers that bring ancient wisdom that we as humans have needed to shift our consciousness and navigate the experience of being human, which is hard. It's hard to do. And, um, the idea is, I mean, if you look back at cave paintings, right, which I learned about in like, I think maybe the fifth grade or something, fourth, fifth grade. And I just remember thinking, wow, they were really not good at drawing. Like, why are those drawings so bad? you know? And, And what I discovered in the writing of my book, The Master Plant Experience, is that actually the cave paintings are not, out in the front of caves about like their daily activities. They're deep, deep, deep in the caves. This is why we're discovering 65,000-year-old cave paintings still now, is because it's like buried very deep in these completely pitch black, low oxygen, right? Ceremonial spaces that were completely removed from any daily activity. And the pictures are very often shamanic, like half human, half animal. Um, there's oftentimes pictures of master plants like cacti or psychedelic mushrooms, or even DNA of like datura, or different kinds of psychedelic plants. And so nobody shared that little tidbit, right, when they talked about cave paintings. But these have been around a very, very, very long time, and plants are very complex. And if you look, they're actually more complex than we are, in many ways. So they know some things, right? And the way that my indigenous teachers refer to the plants is as masters, as master plants. And that means, and they talk to them as if they were revered family, grandmother, grandfather, mother, father, sometimes children, but they were reverent and humble, and understood that they're powerful. And when I talk to my teachers, they did not say master plants are good, and they didn't say they're bad. They said they're powerful, right? So the relationship with power, that's something I think humans struggle quite a bit with. And that's where I think a lot of our troubles come up around master plants, because master plants are not just ayahuasca and San Pedro and, the psilocybe mushrooms. Um, they're also uh, tobacco and the coca plant, right? And the opium poppy, right? So we could look at what's happened with tobacco, which is the most sacred plant in the world. Actually, even in places it's not indigenous, tobacco is the most sacred plant. So that's interesting. Um, the opium poppy, I mean, we are all struggling around the world with this horrible opioid epidemic that has come from our mistreatment, right? Our mistreatment of opioids, of the poppy, the origin, right? And same with coca, right? So with all of these plants that are master plants, um, the idea is if you don't come with the reverence and humility and respect and reciprocity, they can destroy you. So that's really why I strongly recommend cultivating a relationship first. And in that process, doing that doing nervous system regulation work. I mean, now it's like there's almost no excuse, because like everyone and their brother offers that stuff. It's not all equal, obviously, but not going for don't assume it's going to fix all your trauma. Don't assume it's going to fix your whole life. It's it's not exactly that way. For some people, yes. For some people, they have a journey. It changes everything. I did have one journey like that. I've had many journeys that, I mean, I don't want to say they caused more problems, but I'm sure they didn't, but they didn't really make a lot of sense to me, and they involved a lot of suffering. And any of those things can happen. Any of those things can happen. There's no guarantees. So doing your own work, and for me, the most interesting part of it is, what do you do at the end afterwards?
That's what I was going to ask you. Integration. Do you feel that integration for potentially Westerners more so, because when you're thrust into some of these ceremonies, as you said, they can be so esoteric or otherworldly that it can almost be jarring to the mind and the nervous system, that when you then have to assimilate back into your daily routine and structure and seeing the same people, it can be very polarizing. That I think that's also what can sometimes cause a little bit of this unsettled, I'm not sure where I am or if I'm coming or going. So would you say integration, and what does integration look like for someone coming out of these spaces?
I mean, the first thing I always would say is, don't make any sudden movements. Right? It's like in those first few months, people love like abandoning their lives and like going to serve ayahuasca in, oh, this is my purpose in life. And like, perhaps it is, but that purpose could probably wait like 3 to 6 months to give you like an opportunity to land. And landing is a much longer process than I think people realize. It's a months and years long process sometimes. That doesn't mean you have to wait to start whatever you might want to start for years, but I will tell you, my most profound experience I've ever had was on that trip to Ecuador, um, with San Pedro cactus. It was a very small amount because in Ecuador, they don't believe in doing, big amounts at all. But I had a very, very beautiful, intense, and very lucid experience with San Pedro. And um, I won't get into the details in this moment, but I never have done San Pedro again. I've never done ceremony with San Pedro where I've consumed San Pedro because I can see I'm still unpacking that experience and everything I've done, creating Portal, writing the master plan experience, working with quantum drops, everything I've done, which I've resisted.
We're seeing a rise in people that are plant medicine ceremonies are obviously extremely powerful. And in some regards, some people develop, I'm going to say in quotes, spiritual superiority, where they identify as being quite enlightened, or they then find ways to disconnect from others. Or as you said, they want to then go and be a shaman, which is, as you said, it definitely that could be their path. But do you believe that this could be a potential trauma response, or is it a neurological state, or is it something else? Like, what is it that is keeping you hear some of these stories where people are sitting every single weekend for years on end with no change happening in their external environments?
Well, I think that what you're describing is actually not uncommon. And, you know, changing your life is hard. It takes so much courage. It actually, I think for a lot of people who are going and sitting so often, there is this desire to chase the peak experience and not actually integrate it into real life. And the way that I see the relationship with the divine and cultivating that truly is embracing the extraordinary, right? Like, and then bringing the extraordinary into the ordinary. It it's not really it's like a kind of addiction and an abuse of the plant, an abuse of the gift to keep going back again and again without making real daily, weekly, monthly, and large scale sometimes changes. And, that kind of goes to that idea of chop wood, carry water. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And I actually have a whole chapter in my book where I talk about this because, and this is not judgment. We all have our attachments to, um, also feeling important, also feeling worthy, also feeling like we have this spiritual connection that brings meaning to our lives. Also, could be part of an identity, a community. It's important to be honest and truthful, especially with ourselves about what's happening. And if we feel like we need to do ayahuasca 700 times um, in order to, what? Right? Like, but are you treating your spouse well? Are you of service to other people? Are you um are you really stepping into being in your purpose? Um Question mark. I don't know. It's not for me to say, but um whenever we're in a state of spiritual superiority, as you're putting it, right? That I'm better, I'm more enlightened. I mean, I would just say I have questions, right? Because usually being the closer we are to enlightenment, the more, well, I'll say every step I've ever taken that felt like it was taking me closer to enlightenment has been the most humbling, like face in the dirt moments, not because I have, right? And whenever I think, which it happens, oh, I have these tools. Oh, I have. In fact, when my son had that seizure, at that time, I was probably in a real moment of hubris. I thought, I'm helping people from all over the world. I have all these incredible tools. I I could help anyone. I really, in some part of me, believe that, and I think gave me all these feelings of worthiness if I look back on that, etc. And spirit was like, okay, you're gonna die, and I did. And that's happened a number of times. It happened in 2024 for me again in a different way, but um that to me is those are my enlightenment moments. My enlightenment moments are not, I'm seeing visions and beautiful things, and those are nice moments. It's nice to have that, but it doesn't, I discovered, I mean, yes, I'm special, you're special. We all have our very special gifts, and also we all suffer. And nobody doesn't suffer, and nobody gets out of this life unscathed, right? And so that's the paradox, right? Is that, um, and I think master plants are incredible teachers of that, but right? They can be abused like anything can be abused. They can be escapes like anything. Work can be an escape. Exercise can be an escape. It doesn't just have to be, like porn can be an escape. I mean, escape looks all kinds of ways.
What's the difference for someone that's not familiar with potentially microdosing or these, I'm not going to use the word, but like these hero journeys where they're using larger doses in more of a, could be in a ceremonial setting in the Amazon, or it could be even, in a setting with, Iboga or something of that sort where you're taking a larger dose. What's the difference between someone taking the microdose or a larger dose in their day to day?
Well, so a larger dose is, most people think of macrodosing, right, as like the trip, the journey, right? You're out of commission for a number of hours. It has beginning, middle, end, and you're seeing the visions and, whatever it may be. There are sort of different doses even within that, where it could just be a dose large enough to instigate an experience, or it could be, people who take 10, 15, 20 times that dose, um, with certain, I'm going to say, just to be clear, there are some things too big of a dose actually could really, really harm you. Certain master plants, less so, right? Like certain kinds of, and when I say plants, it's not a botanical term, it includes mushrooms and, roots and leaves and vines and all of that. Um, but there are these more like heroic doses that um, some people are very interested in. And, different communities, indigenous communities, really operate very differently. There are communities that, they do have these bigger experiences. A lot of indigenous communities don't, though, have these huge kinds of experiences, and not very often. In fact, and it's the mestizo shamans who are kind of catering, especially to like the tourism, that they add things that are maybe dangerous or maybe make it extra strong and so on, but that's not what would happen in their community. And they do that for kind of the West or the global North, or however you want to think of it, because we like a lot of like fireworks and cannonballs, that kind of thing. Um, then there's microdosing. Microdosing is sub-psychedelic. You're not going to trip. You can go shopping usually, or parent your kids, or, um, go to work, and you may feel differently. Like you may feel more, creative. You might feel more euphoric. You might feel more uplifted. You might feel more anxious. I mean, there's different possibilities. Um, it does alter people's experience, not even just the day they take it, maybe the next day, right? So you don't take it every day for a number of reasons. Um, And that creates all kinds of shifts. I actually think that's probably going to be the way that most people who end up engaging with psychedelics, and kind of the greater population, are going to experience the most benefit and are the most likely to engage. And because a lot of people aren't ready to do the whole big surrender and see their demons or their angels, right? Not everybody is interested in doing that, but I have seen many people with microdosing have incredible healing from postpartum depression, from traumatic brain injury, from depression in general, from social anxiety. I mean, I've worked with people who are neurodivergent, uh, autistic, other, OCD, where I've just seen incredible benefit, migraines, cluster headaches, asthma. Um, so it's where the bigger experiences can absolutely, for some people, be life-saving, truly life-saving. Um, it's not net I don't see it as the only option, for people who need help and support on their healing path, and I also think that people can have mystical experiences with microdosing. It's just different. And I would say, my whole work has been around people who are very sensitive. You know, my practice when I was really doing, neurology with all of my time, and the people I coach and mentor now are, the people who can hear a bee sneeze, 5 miles away. So for me, not every person needs to be blown apart in order to get access the kind of experiences they may need for whatever the reason they might be engaging. Um, so I'm a fan of microdosing. I think it can be profoundly helpful to people. I've also worked with a lot of people in perimenopause and menopause. I think it can be absolutely life-saving for people who are in these periods of rites of passage. Um, and that's primarily how I work with people is supporting them through these rites of passage of various kinds, whether it be into motherhood, whether it be into perimenopause or andropause or big life experiences that are not necessarily ones that everybody has, but you know, these moments of truth in our lives that really strip us down, um, or open us up. And, um, those are the people that I mentor and work with. And it could be with microdosing, or it can sometimes be with larger dosing, it could be with quantum dosing. And then it's about accessing, right, again, that um, mystical side of life, right? The extraordinary of life, which is all around us. And I think there are some people who need those big doses to kind of blow them open um, more. And some people, right? And this is why people who have like psychosis or who have, you know, certain kinds of neurodivergent conditions already are walking around with much wider open sensory gating. Gifted people walk around with much wider open sensory gating. I also have said, like, I live a very psychedelic existence. It doesn't mean, I don't know what reality is, although, I mean, do any of us? But even if we think we do, but it's like those things have been very available to me in my life. So I don't need to keep going back, right? Because that's not um if anything, I feel like that would dull what I have already, right? And there are a lot of people like that who might need support during difficult times or unusual times, but don't necessarily need to be blown apart and put back together every time.
Where can someone start if they want to dip their toe in the water and they are leaning towards the microdosing side of things? How does someone start with having access to microdosing? Obviously, in different countries and different states, the regulations are very different, but how could someone begin to safely find where they could access how to start microdosing? And when you're saying microdosing, are you using several different master plants or is it generally usually mushrooms that you're microdosing with?
It's typically going to be mushrooms, probably. There are others too. Um, and I mean, educate people. So I'll do coaching sessions to kind of help them. Different strains are very different. The way they're grown changes. I'll tell you a story like, um, Maria Sabina, the curandera who in Mexico, who unwittingly and I think unwantingly introduced mushrooms to the global north. She would only have, in many cases, children gathering the mushrooms because she said they were the only ones pure enough to touch them. And if they were bringing them back from somewhere, they were supposed to take the roads that were less traveled so they wouldn't encounter anyone who might have negative energies or like a funeral procession, because that would affect the medicine. So, I think we're very mechanical in our culture around like, compounds and doses, but we're not really thinking about the energetics and spiritual nature of the experience and of these as beings, which they're considered beings, and they're not like things or drugs or tools or right, or even medicines. They're beings. Um so it's a hard thing for me to answer, because I mean, there are certain people I would recommend. Um, you know, the way they grow, where they're singing and praying with them, and you know, the it's a whole work, right? Like a devotion. And then there are like the ones that are being grown you don't know where, you don't even know the strains, or maybe you do. Um, but I think that matters a lot more than we realize. And so, and I've had crazy stories. I mean, I've had people referred to me who like they're doctors, and I'm talking doctors I think are smart and great, referred them to like the grocery checkout guy who like made them pay in Bitcoin in the back parking lot, right? Like, and made them have to weigh it out and do like, these are like, right? It's not ideal. And in this world, in this time, you don't want to just like get something that you don't know. And these are really, really about opening our spiritual portals, um, our mental, emotional, and spiritual portals, right? It's going to open windows and doors like microdosing, macrodosing. It's important to be really clear about the process of who they are, how they were grown, how they were cared for, how they were prepared. So that's why I offer coaching for people. Just really, that's why. But for people who know, and are able to, they're in a place where they can access it. Ideally, it's, legal or decriminalized, which is more and more the case in the US, certainly. And I think in the world, slowly, slowly, I think it can be a really powerful experience. But as I say, always get to know the plant before engaging. Be in conversation, cultivate that relationship. It's a relationship, it's an intimate relationship, and it can change your life forever, good, bad, or unknown.
Do you have a personal favorite?
Um, I mean, I don't exactly have what I'd call a favorite. It's sort of like when people ask me what my favorite color is. It's like, how can you have a favorite? But I mean, I think, I have a very, very, very special relationship with San Pedro because of that experience that I had. And I think in some way, at the end of that experience, I was kind of initiated into being, you know, a person who is connected to that plant, like in a is the kind of the easiest way for me to say it. Um, so while I wouldn't say it's my that's my favorite, I would say I probably feel the most intimate with that. particular plant, but I mean, I grow San Pedro cacti, I grow ayahuasca, I grow brugmansia, I grow tobacco. I love them. I mean, I really, for me, it's not about consuming my plants. It's about tending them, right? That's like my service to the plants because of the gifts that they've given me.
What has been the most profound, I'm going to say, healing experience that you have noticed or transformation that you've personally witnessed in someone doing plant medicine?
You know, seeing people who have serious addiction, um, that's destroying their lives, destroying their health, destroying their relationships, um, you know, watching them come out of an experience where they're able to just stop and completely change their lives. Um, even even with, even with things like heroin or opioids or things that are just incredibly, incredibly hard to stop. Um, to me, that's incredible to see people just, I mean, it's like having a new lease on life after one experience or two experiences. Um, Again, it's not like the medicine's doing it for them. They are given this opportunity and then they have to make the change. But it is so profound to see how how people are able to remember who they are. And it comes forth in people leaving abusive relationships. I could tell some stories about that. Um, People who are ending addictions, people who are um, healing from sexual trauma, um, that are putting them into really abusive situations. I mean, I don't know, but for me, I mean, healing is a very miraculous process. So I could I could tell stories, all day long. I always want to temper that though by saying again that there are no guarantees, right? That that's going to happen either. What's beautiful is that it's possible.
Have you observed long-term neurological changes that are either positive or they could be on the destabilizing side in plant medicine ceremonies? Like, how would you explain the changes that are happening? You've brought up neuroplasticity. Obviously, neuroplasticity usually takes repetition to change that pathway with the neurochemistry. So, how are some people having one ceremony and it's profoundly rewiring or rerouting a new neural pathway from that single ceremony alone?
So what psychedelics do in part is open these critical periods of plasticity and like what we have in childhood, but don't really have very often in adulthood, if at all. Which doesn't mean we don't have plasticity, but these critical periods are like these window periods. And that's why childhood trauma embeds so profoundly, is because there's this kind of opening of plasticity. So when we activate that, it allows for a kind of rewiring opportunity that doesn't just end with the experience itself, but depending on the medicine, it can vary. Like ketamine, shorter, ibogaine, months, right? It's other ones are kind of in between. That rewiring can take place, and there's these opportunities, which is again goes to integration and goes to coaching and goes to holding. And I don't expect anyone to come out of an experience and change their lives um, without having someone.
You mentioned before about remembering, coming home to who we are. What, in your experience, does it mean to really remember?
Well, we emerge um, into this world with, I think, a kind of loving nature and really with some very basic needs. We want love, we want to be seen, we want to be appreciated um, for who we are. And, leaving ancestral and lineage and epigenetics aside for a moment, um, right? Because we do come in with some epigenetic things, but basically a lot of what happens in those early years is either facilitating our needs and allowing us to kind of, right, or I'm going to even back up and say, a lot of people know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the top of that pyramid, right, the hierarchy is self-actualization. But, and I talk about this in my book, but the Blackfoot people uh, have a very different view of it. He spent a summer with the Blackfoot people, and um, their idea is that self-actualization is how we all emerge, how we're all born. We're born self-actualized. And in life, our job is to remain self-actualized and use that self-actualization to uphold our family and our culture over generations. So self-actualization is not like this sort of um, elite, thing that we someday get. Um, it's actually something we come with. And I would say we do come in self-actualized, and then events transpire that make us forget that we are these, amazing beings that can uphold family and culture in really beautiful ways through our, uniqueness and our um, ability to be in community. And so what we're doing is stripping away a lot of that so that we can see through it, whatever's stopping us from doing that, and um, find our way back into that self-actualized self that was always there.
Which sounds like it's sort of love at the heart of all of it.
It is. And, it's sort of a hard word for me to use because it sort of seems vague, but, um, I like things to be practical. That's my doctor side, but it is really, it is at the root, right? Um, it's self-love. It's love of others. It's love of all beings. It's love of the invisible, right? What's invisible to us. And that is really all what right relationship is about, right? It's cultivating intimacy with all of these things.
I've heard you say that strangeness is sacred. Why is being strange sacred? Why is it so important?
Well, I think it goes back to exactly what we just talked about. It's um all the ways that the parts of us that were unacceptable, and we kind of edited out, are usually filled with gifts if we go looking, right? I mean, you know, it's sort of like what's in the garbage heap. What we think is the garbage heap is actually often, there are these jewels there. And so much of, right, that goes back also to like what I said about neurodivergence. It's like we think that, oh, like neurodivergence means we're strange, we're weird, we don't fit in. But in fact, like oftentimes that's where there's a real giftedness. It doesn't always feel like a giftedness because of how it's framed. And that's why I say it's strangeness, right? It's our strangeness, but it's really just what makes us unique.
Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you want to leave the listeners with?
The only thing we didn't really talk about was working with these plants vibrationally. And that for me is really powerful because, um, that's a kind of work that has its roots in indigenous practice. Like for those who have been in ayahuasca ceremonies and experienced Icaros, the song sung by the ayahuasquero, um, that's considered a vibrational transmission of the plant. That's a medicine that is as powerful as drinking the brew. And so there are ways to engage kind of what I call in a quantum way. And one of those ways is looking at pictures. The cover of my book, The Master Plant Experience, has an ayahuasca slice of the vine. And for me, that's like you have now had an ayahuasca experience just by looking at that cover. There's a transformation that happens, right? Because you've now engaged. Um, and one of the ways that I work vibrationally is using quantum drops, um, which are made ceremonially and vibrationally, And I mean, I could talk about the science of it, but the idea is that there are impactful ways to work with the energy of these plants and masters, um, that can be really potent and profound and don't require you to travel to Peru, right, necessarily, or have these big experiences, but you can still be impacted in very, very significant ways. And I actually would never have thought that I would be talking about that or thinking about that. Quantum vibrational medicine. But for me, actually, just as a doctor, I think that's probably going to end up being the future of medicine, in general, is going to be working, with frequency and vibration. Um, and yeah, I think it's a very profound way to heal.
It's interesting. I've spoken with a few doctors on this podcast, and it's interesting. The theme in the last 6 months has definitely been towards quantum healing, quantum medicine in terms of, the future and the way forward. I am curious, though, if you don't mind, briefly, just what the science is behind those quantum drops, like what how you could simplify it for someone so they could understand the benefit of taking a quantum drop for their health, their well-being, all those sorts of things.
The science is actually based in Nobel Prize winner Luc Montagnier's work. He won his Nobel Prize for HIV, but his legacy work was all about imprinting DNA in water from a distance, uh, in low frequency states. And so, of course, he was reviled, right? Because the same way that, Watson after, right, the Watson and Crick team, won the Nobel Prize. And then, we started hearing about vitamin C and how important that was. And then it's like, oh, that person's loony. And again, that happened somewhat with Luc Montagnier. But of course, these are really brilliant people who are exploring new frontiers. And so that work, uh, is the basis for how we imprint the vibrational, um, and frequency aspects of these master plants together with the master plants, but without putting any of the plant in it. So they're legal, they're safe, sober, pregnant, children, people who have psychosis that, or other psychiatric reasons, or medically fragile, or sensitive, or whatever their reason, people who want something to help them for preparation or integration, all of those different kinds of reasons, they can engage with these. We've used them in children. I've had children use them with their parents, and that's been really incredible for creating, um, kind of recalibrating, kind of certain family dynamics, or issues with kids that can come up. Yeah, I mean, anyway, the science behind them, I think, um, is related to modulating the sensory gating, right? These windows of perception that we have in our cells that are measurable. Actually, there are tests, in hospitals you can do to measure sensory gating, auditory evoked potentials, and visual evoked potentials. But um, a lot of people either have too wide open or too closed. So the idea is not you just want to open them necessarily, but you want to be able to modulate them. So working in that vibrational way allows for that, and for that kind of modulating, where it's not too much this way or too much that way, but allowing the cell and the body and the spirit really to um, become a partner in the process of.
Dr. Maya Shetreat, thank you so much for your time today. I think in this day and age where psychedelics, plant medicine has become cool and a lot of people are wanting to try it, there's very limited resources that are available with a grounded approach on how to move into that space, how to use them responsibly, how to integrate them. So thank you so much for your time today and for all of the wisdom and the knowledge and the work that you're doing around this space to provide, I think, such a grounded and safe space for other people to be able to navigate in their own healing journeys.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.